All right. Good morning or afternoon, everyone, depending on where you are. I'm Cody Eaton with JBS International. Thank you for joining today's webinar, Understanding Equity and Inclusion Frameworks with Crystal Bennett. Before we begin, we'd like to review a couple housekeeping items. All participants in the webinar will be muted for the duration of the presentation. You will be able to unmute and ask questions. However, we request that you don't unmute unless actively asking a question, as well as, you're free to use the chat feature if you're free to use the chat feature to do so as well. You can open your chat window by clicking on the chat icon located at the bottom center of your toolbar window. We will continuously monitor the chat throughout today's webinar, but the presenters will address comments and questions at the end of the presentation. This webinar is being recorded. The recording and presentation slides will be made available to the mailing list in the coming weeks. There will be a link to a post-event survey sent in the chat at the end of the presentation, as well as emailed to all participants in the coming days. We would greatly appreciate it if you fill this out, as this will help support our future development efforts. If you experience any technical issues during the session, please message us using the chat feature or email us at obc-tta@jbsinternational.com. Additionally, today's webinar provides 1.5 hours of National Board of Certified Counselors credit. If you are interested in earning these credits, please email your name and email address to the obc-tta@jbsinternational.com inbox. And also make sure you fill out the post-event survey that will be sent at the end of the webinar. Filling out the post-event survey is required in order to receive those 1.5 hours of MBCC credit. Once you've done this, a certificate will be emailed to you within the coming weeks. All right, now I would like to turn it over to our presenter.
Hi, good morning or good afternoon, everyone. Great to be in space with you all. I am Crystal Bennett. I'm the CEO and founder of an organization called Thrive, where I offer person-centered, culturally responsive, and trauma-informed strategies for individuals and communities to heal and prevent trauma from occurring. So it's really great to be in space with you all today to talk about equity and inclusion frameworks. I do invite you during our conversation today. My hope is that it is conversational and that you do take that time to come off mute if you have questions, or come off mute to engage in some dialogue and create community together, or simply participate in the chat box and ask any questions or provide any comments. We're going through our content today. It's really great to be in space with you all. So as we're talking about equity and inclusion frameworks, y'all have a little reaction button on your Zoom options here. So I'm curious to know how many of you all, maybe over the course of the last couple of years, have heard the statement, or perhaps may have even made the statement, we need more diversity. And so maybe you've been thinking about how to recruit more diverse individuals for your staff, or how to recruit more diverse individuals for your board, or how to serve perhaps a more diverse clientele. Anyone in here? Yep, I see a thumbs up from someone on here. Yep, another thumbs up, right? Hands up, definitely. See, I see some things in the chat box. Yep, got a little thumbs up going up in the chat box. So my question to you all, as you've considered these statements, as you've considered whether it's that you've heard those statements from others within your organization, or you've heard those statements from outside of your organization, or you've said those statements, is what does it mean? What was it that you were meaning, or that you thought was meant in saying we need more diversity? So feel free to put it in the chat box, or again, I invite you to come on off mute. We are a small enough group in space today that we can have some interactive dialogue. What does DEI mean to you? You're thinking, whoo, that's a big question, Crystal. So take a moment and just think about that. and certainly put your responses in the chat box. But what I have found as a practitioner in this work, not just in the last several years as companies have made an explicit commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion, but even prior to that, is that I hear many companies and organizations saying, we're committed to diversity, here's our anti-racist or our equity statement, and then we look at the company and here's the diversity. Does this resonate with anyone? If I see a couple head nods, and if y'all have the ability to put your cameras on, I know it's not required, but I'd love to feel in space with folks today, right? So again, show of hands, I see a thumbs up, like, yep, that's the diversity. That's what it looks like, right? And so I'll just kind of describe the image on your screen is essentially the diversity is the organization is very top heavy when we think about 6 cis white men. And then we start to see the diversity as we look at the levels of the organization, perhaps in middle management, and then our frontline team members is where we're really seeing the diversity. We're seeing more Black and brown folks or individuals who have lived expertise who are now on the frontline layers of the organization. Right. The challenge with that is that what ultimately happens in this presentation today with you all today is an adaptation of a presentation that I typically do that's called diversity as a distraction. So we focus on diversity, which is how can we bring more of XYZ people into space? How can we bring more Black and brown bodies into the space? How do we bring more individuals with lived experience into the space? How do we bring more individuals who may have low socioeconomic status or may have different abilities into the space? But the bringing of those folks in the space only stops at the front line because it gives the facade, it gives the appearance of focusing on diversity, but we haven't quite peeled back the layers to have an understanding of what's been inhibiting the diversity to begin with. And I see a thing in the chat box I want to just take a moment to read. So diversity is about people from a variety of backgrounds. Equity is about creating a truly fair environment. And inclusion is about creating a space for diverse people to be truly included in dialogues and decisions where we work. It also celebrates our uniqueness and welcomes us into space. Belonging is about feeling needed and loving the space. Thank you so much for that very comprehensive breakdown. Yeah, so as we think about diversity really is just the condition of having or being composed of differing elements. That's all. Diversity is that I can look out into a sea of people and I can see people that are comprised of very different elements, or as I'm engaging in conversation, because maybe there are things that I can't see that make us diverse, but I'm engaging in relationships and conversations with people where there is that variety of background. Hey, there's this saying that I once came across, and certainly no offense to the individual who said this statement, but diversity is being invited to the party. Inclusion is being asked to dance. What does that mean to you all? Is it something that you think fully encompasses the true definition of diversity and inclusion? Do you think something might be missing? How might you tweak that? So I'm curious to hear from you all. How does this statement sit with you? And again, I invite you, if you want to come off mute, certainly feel free to. You don't need to try to be getting your fingers to do all the work. So diversity is being invited to the party. Inclusion is being asked to dance. What do you think?
I think that it's more than just giving a nod and saying you're doing it, but actually participating actively.
Yeah. Yep. So we can't just get that nod and say, all right, we're going to do it. But like, how are we actively engaging? What are the actions that are demonstrating that this truly is a commitment? Anyone else? What are your thoughts around this statement? So what I would encourage you to think about when you see this statement is diversity is being invited to the party. Who's doing the inviting? Inclusion is being asked to dance. Who's doing the asking? The way that we think about diversity and inclusion, we have to consider power dynamics and the need to be invited and the need to being asked to dance assumes a one-way power relationship. Because I can't show up to the party unless someone who has decision-making power invites me. I can't get out on the dance floor and cut loose unless someone asks me to go out to the dance floor and to dance. So what happens when I want to plan the party? What happens when I want to decide what the theme of the party is going to be? I want to decide what the food on the menu is going to be. I want to decide what type of music is going to be played. Do I merely get to enter the space of the party and then have to wait until I'm asked to engage further? Have to wait until it's my turn? So let's think about our organizations as a party and think about who are we inviting to our party and who has to wait to be asked to dance, whether that's our team members, whether those are the clients that we're serving. So oftentimes organizations start off with a statement of wanting to diversify. So we recruit and we invite people into our party. We recruit various people to work for us. We recruit or advertise that the space is open for various clients. But then we define through our dress code policies what the dress code is. Then we define through our policies related to professional conduct what behavior is acceptable. Our party says what time the party starts. Our party says what time the party ends. And all of this is predetermined by cliques of people who have power, privilege, and positionality to define what the rules are. And then if someone breaks the rules, then they're asked to leave the party and may not be invited back to the party. Maybe I don't want to dance the electric slide in the old school way. I want to do that new school electric slide. But the rules say, that ain't the way we do the electric slide here. Right? So what happens when it's a song I've never heard of? Or I want to dance a different way? What happens when I'm in an environment where I'm invited to a meeting because I'm told my voice is valuable? We've said we want to diversify the voices that are in the meeting. And then I show up and I'm outvoted by 10 other folks in the meeting that have more power than I do, that have more privilege than I do, that hold positionality because of the positions that they're in. What happens is that we attempt to create a space of inclusion, which is that we've provided a seat at our table, but that seat merely gives access, but only on the terms that have already been defined by the dominant group. And so truly that space, that seat, turns into tokenization. It turns into a misguided diversity attempt that we've said we want diversity. We've said we want more of XYZ demographic, and we bring XYZ demographic here to have our one Black friend so that we can say we're not racist. So I want to pause and just kind of hear from you all, initial thoughts as you're considering this aspect here. Go ahead, Shirley.
You know what? I think this is like so accurate. I was just thinking that right before you brought it up about how I just want to show you a quick example. They have a opioid response committee in Minnesota, and it's comprised of diverse people from different backgrounds. And some of us wanted to speak from the community, and they said, no, we could not speak, that only the people who were on the committee could speak. And so to me, it was allowing us to go into the meeting, but not allowed to speak. So to me, that was very tokenistic to be able to say, community, please come and join us, but community, you cannot speak. So that's a very good example.
Wow, thank you so much. That I feel that. I felt that because it happens so often, right? Come, our doors are open, but you can't speak unless we invite you to speak, right? And then if we allow you to speak and you say something that perhaps ruffles a little feathers, then maybe we don't invite that person back here again. We don't invite them, those people, back here again. And we then start to other, right? Because those people don't know how to show up in the space and behave and conform to the way that we want to do things here. I appreciate that, Shirley, and certainly not being affiliated with that, but just extending, my heartfelt apologies, because we've got to do better. We have to do better.
It kind of reminds me too of like the pseudo voice, when you ask someone and you're saying, I really want your opinion, I really want your input, and then they do the exact same thing they were going to do in the first place. So the person is like enticed into like feeling like they are included and belong in a space, but there never was the intention to listen to them. It's just
yeah, absolutely. Right. Like, give us your input.
Yeah.
Or a lot of organizations will distribute surveys, right? Mm-hmm. We distribute all of these surveys and we want to hear the consumer voice. And then all of us with power or positionality sit around the table and look at the results. And then we make the decisions as to what's going to happen. And we have the power to decide, are we actually going to move forward with this recommendation, or are we going to do something about the concerns that were brought, or are we merely just going to tout that we did surveys and obtained information? Right, so it becomes an ability to check that off our to-do list, right? We did it, we did surveys, we heard the voices, but again, it's tokenizing, because true equity work means that we engage the voices of those most significantly impacted by our decisions, our policies and practices from the beginning all the way through the process to the end in the evaluation. It is not merely collecting surveys and getting data. It is not merely saying, please come have a seat at our table. It is about getting the information with the voices of those most disproportionately impacted in actually helping to design the questions that will be asked, to then engaging those same voices to determine how do we widen the scope of how we obtain that data, right? Because then we tend to say we have hard to reach populations. Well, we don't actually have hard to reach populations. We're just not actually engaging in actions to reach those populations. And then when we elicit all of that feedback, again, all of those voices are in that space to look at and interpret that data through an equity lens, and then being part of the decision-making of what do we do to address the concerns, how do we implement it, and then how do we collect metrics for accountability to evaluate whether or not those changes meant something. equity work is a process. It is an intentional process so that we're not tokenizing, we're not harming, we're not being performative or placating. But it is about being extremely intentional and making sure that we're involving people from the start to the finish, and that that work truly is led by those who are most directly impacted and at the pace of those that most directly are impacted need it to go. Any additional thoughts or comments around this? So I've just given a little tidbit as to what equity work is. How would you all define equity? I'm very curious. I'm always very curious because I think we have a variety of definitions, none necessarily being the right way, because there's not one right way to do equity work. But what does equity work, how is that defined for you all? What does it mean? You know, Shirley, you had put a comment. I seen you just came off.
I
mute,
did.
so thank you. Yes, you had put a comment around it's about creating and I like that you said truly fair environment. So I would love for you to expand a little bit on your definition.
Well, I've been involved in equity work for quite a few years. Even before I came to JBS, I was on an equity advisory council for a regional entity. It's called Metropolitan Council here in the Minneapolis area. And I felt the work, it was like, we needed to do more. And we had to me, very minute decisions to make. And one of the biggest decisions we made was whether to increase the fare, for buses and light rail. And so we had a lot of debate around it. And then the entity decided on a kind of a compromise. And I felt good about the decision that we helped to make, because it was, we had a lot of debate on it. And then we really thought about our communities that would be affected by that decision, because there's so many poor people that don't have any other option than to take a bus or a train. And so, and then, but the other part that evolved too was that people could, get help from communities to have them pay for that, that ride. So to me, it's about the process itself. And sometimes what frustrates me is entities can write things down on paper and make it sound really good. And then when it comes to the practical part about really implementing it or practicing it, it isn't followed through on. And so, and it's kind of like, I still have hope for it though, even though it's frustrating, because like in Minneapolis, they had the George Floyd killing here in 2020. And then most recently, the Minneapolis police created 2 divisions, one operations and one community trust. So I still have hope that there'll be positive change for the community, so people don't become harmed because of the policies. So yeah, it's a long-winded way of saying, equity can be whatever people want it to be, but it has to be honored as well.
Thank you, Shirley. Really just kind of highlighting what you indicated is when you were talking about the decision of whether or not to raise the bus fare, is that you all sat there and considered, who is this going to impact? Who does this have the potential to harm? And how can we mitigate that harm, right? And so I want to elevate that, because for all of you in this space, as you're thinking about your policies, as you're thinking about your practices, as you're thinking about really going on this journey around equity, those are some of the questions that you have to ask every single time a decision has been made. or is being made? Those are the questions that you have to ask as you're going back into your policies and your procedures, is looking at your policies, your procedures, and your practices through the lens of equity means that we're taking a look and we're asking ourselves, why does this policy or practice exist? Where did it come from? What was the hoped for outcome? Who does it have the potential to harm? How do we mitigate that harm? Is this policy or practice or procedure even needed? But that's the true work of equity, is that we look at everything through an equity lens, and it becomes a part of our policies and practices that we are always asking ourselves, how does this policy, practice, or procedure impact people, and how might it impact people differently, and how do we mitigate that impact if that impact is going to be harmful? The other piece that Shirley mentioned that I want to highlight, that's actually in the definition of equity that I'm sharing with you now, is that equity is a process and equity is an outcome. So equity as a process means that we are engaging meaningfully with those who are most impacted by policies and practices. Right? So it means that we're not sitting around a boardroom table or sitting around a conference room making policies and practices and not engaging with either our team members or our community who are going to be most impacted by those policies and practices. And then as a result of engaging the voices of those most directly impacted, the outcome is that people's identities no longer determine the outcomes, because everybody, and I want to say that again, everybody gets what they need to thrive. So this is not about equality and treating everyone the same and not seeing color and turning an eye to say, hey, I treat everyone, I treat everyone the way I would want to be treated. No, we treat everyone the way they want to be treated. We treat everyone the way they need to be treated. And we meet people where they are to ensure that we're involving their voices in what those needs might be on a very individualized and customized basis. What do y'all think about this definition and kind of whether it aligns with the work you all are doing, or it aligns with your own thought process, or not? What are our thoughts here with this definition?
I would just add something.
Yeah, absolutely.
I would add that I think that a diverse group's identity in certain situations has to be considered, especially if they have, like, for example, language barriers, because they can't understand what we're saying unless we have interpreters for them.
Yes.
And so what I would suggest is that we have to consider the uniqueness of the communities that we're working with and make accommodations for that communication to be able to be understood by our clients and our communities. Because if we don't, then we're just like having it, again, being tokenistic and not having them understand it, and then allowing feedback from them too, because the interpreter can, like, help them with that. So I think there's special situations where we do consider their identities and their uniqueness.
Yeah, I think we always consider the uniqueness and identity, right? I don't even think there's a special consideration. I think it is when we think about this process, and perhaps even tweaking this language and say we engage in a culturally responsive way with those most directly impacted, so that we're always centering what it means to understand culture and identity and what's linguistically appropriate, so that we can engage all people in the process in the way that is going to really perpetuate the best engagement for them. Yeah, so I appreciate you bringing that to light. Anyone else? I know some of y'all are probably internally processing. Some of you are trying to multitask. Some of you are like, whoo, my wheels are churning. Or some of you are like, look, I'm just showing up to get the information. But what I'd love to just hear what else is coming up for some of you. And I see a chat in the chat box, so I see wheels are definitely turning. That's, the wheels turning are good. Just don't burn too much rubber in your brain there. Then I hear, as mentioned previously, the process component has been extremely challenging for people to really employ. Yeah, and as we think about, let me see, there's something in my way over here. I'm trying to read and there's something in my chat box. Okay, the many issues identified by the dance invitation example continue to be stumbling points, right? And so we have to be able to identify what are those stumbling points and then be very intentional about how we can stumble through them and get past them so they don't become immobilizing. Because what I often find in this work is that when we hit a barrier, right, we haven't, especially a barrier that we have not anticipated, is that somehow it just stops us in our tracks and we become immobilized. Right, and just think about this as a journey. Any of you ever gone on a road trip? You go on a journey, right? Or before many of you came, me and Jenny were on here and we were talking about our travel debacles, where we needed to travel somewhere, and with the way the current airlines are set up, you're missing flights or flights are delayed. And it doesn't mean I just sit there and cross my arms and say, well, I guess I'm just not going to continue this journey. It means I pull out my map and I start looking about a detour. I look for an alternate way. I may have to call on somebody to say, hey, I'm stuck in Dallas. I know you're 2 hours away. Can you come get me and I can crash with you for the night until the next flight tomorrow? But you don't stop moving. That is the key piece with equity work, is you have to keep going. You have to keep moving, even from time to time. If we need to take a step back and regroup and recalibrate, but then we get back on and we keep going. I see another comment here, also diversity in leadership, not just in the pool of employees. Yes, which is why I originally showed that graphic, is it can't just stop at the people that our clients see. So we could say, oh, we're committed to equity. Look at all the Black and brown people we got as caseworkers and as frontline workers. No, this has to be through every level of the organization. Yeah, awesome. So I want to engage you all in a equity gallery viewing, right? If we were all in person, I'd have probably like 12 images up around the room, and we'd be spending some time walking around the room and doing a viewing of various images that are out there related to equity. But since we're in this space together virtually, I'm gonna put up one screen that has 4 images. And I just want to take, like 3 to 4 minutes for you to look at each image and for you to reflect personally as to what you see and how the image resonates with you and how the image encompasses equity, or is there opportunity for improvement with the image that you see. So I'm going to go ahead and put this up. So you have 4 images, and the numbers are up in the left-hand corner of each of the images. So image number 1, you should be seeing 4 bicycles and an individual who's in a wheelchair. Image number 2 is right below it, where it's showing some pipelines and how community resources are distributed. Image number 3 is showing 3 individuals at a baseball game. And picture number 4 has an image where the top half of the image is 3 kind of kids' heads over the fence. And then the bottom half of the image is showing what's making it possible that those kids' heads are able to see over the fence. So let's just take about 3 to 4 minutes in your space to just look at each of these images and just process, how do these images represent equity, or how might they not, right? And how might they resonate with the work that you all are doing in your spaces around equity? So I'll stop talking here so that you can take those minutes to do some deep thinking.
Can I offer something too?
Absolutely.
I've seen another one with the Seattle Indian Health Board, and what they did was they showed a mother, a native mom, who, looking at that same fence, she broke the fence down to make a cradle board for her baby, because that reflected the her needs for her as a mom. She needed to just take the fence down. So I thought that was pretty telling.
I would love for you, Shirley, when I give my contact information at the end, to maybe send that. And even for the rest of you, I mean, I've got probably a database of around 12 different, like I said, I would have had these all up around a room if we were all together. So I've got about 12 different images that I've seen different organizations use, but if you've seen others, I would absolutely love to add those to my repertoire here. I see some comments going in the chat box, so certainly feel free to put some thoughts in the chat box as you're starting to think through, and we'll just take about another 2 minutes for y'all to continue to pick these apart a little bit. So I see some good chatter in the chat box thus far, but I want to really open this up to have some conversation around these images and your thoughts. So feel free to come off mute and what are you seeing? What are you feeling in these images? What resonates with you around what equity work looks like or doesn't look like based on these images? And also, if you have questions about the images, feel free to ask, because I know sometimes as you're taking a closer look, you're thinking, well, what is this? What is this really showing?
I know I'm the moderator, but can I say something?
Of course.
I'm looking at two, and it's very interesting to me because The second one, if you just look at it like if you just look at the second part of Two Straight On, it almost looks unfair. But if you zoom out, you're seeing like it's like if you're just looking at the little picture, like who gets more resources, then some people get more resources than others, and that seems unfair. But if you zoom out and you look at stuff like historical like events of oppression and like socioeconomic status and various other things, like what's fair has to be representative of the whole, I guess.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And you're right on. Is a lot of times people look at number 2 and they think immediately, that's not fair. Why is the community on the left getting so much more? Well, if we look at the first part of this picture, what we see is that each of these communities are getting equal resources, but have we taken into consideration the impact of gentrification? Have we taken into consideration the impact of redlining? Have we taken into consideration the impact of colonization, enslavement, right? Like things that have essentially created a situation where you have whole communities of people that are behind, that don't have the same level of access. And equity is not about giving people the same thing. Equity is about giving people what it is that they need. So then if you are keeping the same amount of resources into the community to the right, and you realize, well, the community to the left needs many more resources, well, then here we have 4 pipelines that now are essentially leveling the playing field so that now there is the same opportunity to thrive and to live a life that's wholesome and is about the well-being of the community. There's I'm trying to look at my bookshelf over here. There's a book called The Sum of Us by Heather McGhee. And in the book, Heather McGhee talks about the zero-sum theory. And essentially, she gives the example of when communities were segregated. So when Black folks and white folks were segregated, all of the community pools were in the white neighborhoods. And then when integration occurred, those pools needed to be open so that everybody could enjoy the pool. And the white folks said, we're not giving up our pools so that Black and brown bodies can swim in the pools. And so they decided to empty all of the pools. And so nobody had the pools. And so there's this belief, and the book really goes through this belief that in order for people who historically have been denied opportunities and privileges to have, is that something must be taken away from those who already have the power and privilege. Well, in this image, we can see clear as day, nothing's being taken away from anyone, right? Nobody's going without as a result of a community getting what it is that they need to just have the same opportunities. And we have to be prepared to have those difficult conversations, because unfortunately, that is often the main proponent against equity work, is that we're taking away from one community to give to another. But when we act out of abundance rather than scarcity, we realize that there is more than enough for all to have. And there's more than enough for people who historically have not had to get a little bit more so that they have the same opportunities or similar opportunities. Other thoughts as you're just thinking about these, and I'll read some of the, I see someone says in equity work, we need allies who can help us. And I would even take that word allies a step further. I typically say accomplices and co-conspirators, because allyship has become such a buzzword that is not grounded in action. We really need people, absolutely, who will come alongside and help break down barriers. And we need people that know when it's time to move out the way and create space to center the voices of those most disproportionately impacted. I see someone says number 4 is their favorite. Everyone has what they need to have a good view. Number 4 is interesting because it's about which direction we look at people. So sometimes when we think about just looking from this side of the fence where we see people's heads above the fence, if we only look at people from that side of the fence, then we fail to recognize that everybody's journey is different and that people need different things. And I think sometimes that's where we get into this habit of simply saying, well, people are resilient. They'll be able to overcome everything. And that becomes a crutch for us to actually consider what that struggle might be and be able to provide everybody with what it is that they need. So what's important about number 4 is we need to see what's happening on both sides of the fence so that we can make sure that we can come alongside and support if there is something that someone needs. Anything else come up for you all as you're thinking about these images? So now I want to engage you all in a bit more thinking around what do you envision an equity-focused organization looking like, feeling like, and sounding like in the context of your work. So I'm going to put a link in the chat box. And this link is going to bring you to an idea board. So when you go to that link, hopefully none of you all have firewalls that are going to prevent you from using it. You're going to see 3 columns. And the first says look like, the middle says feels like, the last column says sounds like. You should be seeing a green circle with a white plus in the center. And if you hit that, it's going to give you a sticky under each of those columns so that you can start to create the vision of what you feel equity looks like, feels like, sounds like. So I do want to invite you all just to take a moment. So hit the green circle with the plus sign so that you can get your sticky, and then you can right away start typing away on the sticky. But I'd like to take just, a few minutes, not too long, but just start getting your brains flowing here this late on a Friday to create our vision together of what equity looks like, feels like, and sounds like. And when you're thinking about the sounds like, don't be afraid to put what do you actually hear people saying? When we think about something sounding like something, what are the words that you're hearing being used? What might employees and their managers be saying to each other? What might we be saying to our clients? And if somebody puts something that you really like, you can actually, so we see that there's a couple stickies that have already been posted up. So you see where it says plus and there's a 0. If you love what somebody has put up, you can actually click that and it'll upvote it. So it'll be like, yes, I love that. And you can give it a thumbs up. So that way it amplifies it. So we start elevating and amplifying what we're seeing on the board. Let's just take 3 to 4 minutes. So we'll go until 5 before the hour to get some thoughts going here. I love seeing all the stickies, so please keep them coming. And if you are having any issues with the board, feel free to put anything in the chat box and I can go ahead and add them to the board, just so we have something with everybody's thoughts on them. Let's take another minute and a half. I'm seeing some great ones and I love seeing you all uptick some of them here. Right, so if you're still adding, please feel free to keep adding. This link will be live for about the next 24 hours. So even if you need to think about it and want to add to it, but I'm going to just go ahead and share what we have so far up here. Okay, so equity looks like happy workers, having diverse leaders in leadership positions, and it looks like we've got 4 upticks here. It looks like welcoming, a range of skin tones, outfits, and hairstyles, concrete plans with tangible and measurable impacts, workers that are moved by the mission and vision of the agency and want to stay, having people with disabilities working alongside other workers, right? So working together, positive, people are happy, being able to engage without fear or judgment. It feels like empowerment, safe. People feel comfortable asking for what they need and are confident that those needs will be met. Being needed, unbiased, goodness, and comfortable. Seen, being listened to and considered, and then listening and considering in return. Belonging, being challenged in a safe, trauma-informed way, not complicit in ideas and workspaces. Trust in decentralized work and decision-making. Being okay to not know things, right? Having that growth mindset and learning is valued. Worthy and valued, everyone is given the opportunity at success. It sounds like many voices speaking, being included in dialogues that address a certain issue and being heard by leadership. Many ears listening, wanting to know more about individual experiences. Loud voices that speak their minds, but also stop to let quieter voices speak too. Many voices being taken into consideration and listened to, speaking up, even if you're not directly affected, and unity. I just want y'all to give yourself a finger clap, finger snap, like this is fantastic. I want to check in. How do we feel about what's on the board? Right? What are some thoughts as you were doing this and as you're taking a moment to reflect on what others in the space have shared?
It just reminds me of something that you said about scarcity. I mean, like, this is not scarcity. Like, this is abundance, and it feels good. Like, the abundance of it feels good. It definitely doesn't come from a place of scarcity. It comes from this place that feels like it's overflowing.
Yeah, I see Shirley's comment. I love this whole bunch.
I do. It's like, some of us took DEI training when we first formed the group, and one of the messages that I'll never forget that I learned and I've told them so many times, is that you want to work in a place where you can be who you are and be welcomed to work in that place, and you don't have to hide who you are. And it really spoke to me, because I feel like no matter where I've been in most of my career, I've had to hide who I am, who I really am, because I feel like if they really know who I am, they wouldn't like me, or they wouldn't want me to stay. And that's really, it's not a very happy place to work when you feel like that.
Yeah, so it feels like being accepted, heard, seen, valued, being able to show up as your authentic whole being without that judgment. And I love that for you, Shirley, because so many people have had those previous experiences that you share, and it does so much harm. Well, thank you for you all engaging in that activity, and I'll make sure that I send out a copy because I can feel it, right? I'm not in space with you all physically, but that feeling is resonating right off of that idea board. I have always appreciated this particular graphic by Dr. D.L. Stewart. When we think about our work in equity, diversity asks, who's in the room? And equity responds, who's trying to get in the room but can't? Whose presence in the room is under constant threat of erasure? Inclusion asks, have everyone's ideas been heard? Justice responds, whose ideas won't be taken as seriously because they aren't in the majority? Diversity asks, how many more of, and pick whichever marginalized or minoritized group you will, have we considered this year, or do we have this year than last? Equity responds, what conditions have we created that maintain certain groups as the perpetual majority here? Inclusion asks, is this environment safe for everyone to feel like they belong? And justice challenges, whose safety is being sacrificed and minimized to allow others to be comfortable maintaining dehumanizing views? Right? This journey does require us to constantly ask, who's trying to get in the room but can't? Who's at the table but is it being heard? What are the conditions at your organization that are keeping certain groups as the perpetual majority? And whose safety are we prioritizing to allow the status quo to be maintained? As I mentioned to you all earlier, the work around equity is a process. This particular graphic it comes from a document called Transforming Organizations by Operationalizing Racial Justice by Maggie Potapchik. When we're doing work around equity, and for me personally and professionally, when I do work around equity, I center racial justice. And that does not mean that other forms of oppression are not as essential. But oftentimes what we find in this work around social justice is that we center works around other forms of oppression, and then we never take the time to center the work around racial oppression. And so when we're able to focus on racial justice, it helps us to identify the tools and the strategies to dismantle other forms of oppression. Oppression that's based on homophobia, transphobia, classism, ableism, ageism, right? Ableism, all of these various forms of oppression. And ultimately the goal is to be able to be in solidarity, to work collectively, to achieve justice and liberation. Equity really is just the beginning. And equity is the process for us to ultimately break down those barriers and level the playing field to live a much more just and liberated life. And so we need to work on building the knowledge, the skills, normalizing these types of conversation. Engage in that hard truth telling so that we can start that process of healing. And we heal through centering relationships. We heal through understanding that conflict is part of the process, and conflict is not necessarily a bad thing. Conflict is an opportunity to engage in difficult and uncomfortable conversations to grow together and to create something new. It's about building will, ensuring that there's mechanisms of accountability, and that we're operationalizing our process through creating action plans and looking at data and creating a culture ultimately that centers on justice and liberation. So when we take a moment and we start breaking each of these down, the first one I really want to take a look at is the building of will, right? Another book recommendation that I have for you all is called The Conversation by Dr. Robert Livingston. And in The Conversation, Dr. Livingston says the real challenge for organizations is not figuring out what can we do, but rather, are we willing to do it? And that hits me in a very deep place. You know, as someone who does this work pretty extensively, I often hear organizations say, I don't know what to do. But when given the tools to do it, there's still not a willingness to do it. It's the I don't know what to do, and now everything is handed to the organization on a silver platter with the steps, with the actions that can be taken, and it's still, oh, we can't do that. Oh, we can't do that either. Oh, we can't change that. Why? Why can't you change it? Are you willing to do it? So I want to ask you all, why do you want to engage in DEI work? What's your why? What's your why? Martin Luther King Jr. had a why. That was Martin Luther King Jr.'s dream. I have a dream that one day we will live in a nation where my 4 children will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. And that was Martin Luther King Jr.'s why. It was the vision. It was the destination. What's your why? Anybody want to share their why or your organization's why? And I will tell you, if you don't know the why, then you'll never get there. The why is where you're going. The why is the vision. The why is what we create an action plan to achieve. If you're not sure the why, we're just stumbling around in the dark.
I'll just go back to what I said when we looked at the board. Like, I'd much rather be in a place where it feels abundant. And, you know, when Shirley talked about being able to be authentic, than showing up to a place every day where I feel like I'm scrambling, or I feel like other people are scrambling. Like, that idea of abundance instead of scarcity really resonates with me today. So
I love that. Absolutely. I'm going to read, I see in the chat box, I believe that if you have the opportunity and ability to stop injustice and you don't, then that injustice happens and continues to happen because of you, right? Silence is complacency. That's it. I mean, there's nothing more to say about that. So I'm going to show you all a video. It's about a 4-minute clip. And I hope it resonates with you just as deeply as it always resonates with me, just as you're thinking about your why. All right, and you don't need to share out your why in this space today, and maybe you don't know why. But I'm gonna share with you the importance of knowing your why. And so let me just go ahead and share this here real quick. So it's about, 3 minutes and 48 seconds.
How do I know? A lot of people, when they think of the phrase, how do I know, they always want to put the what behind it. How do I know what I'm supposed to do? The question that you really should ask is, how do I know why I'm here? Because when you know your why, your what becomes more clear and more impactful. If you know, like for instance, people know that I do comedy, but that's what I do. My why is to inspire people to walk in purpose. So I can do comedy, I can write books, I can be in a movie, because all of it is motivated by my why. In fact, I have a new web series out called Michael Jr. Break Time. We probably just did the 6th episode. It's on YouTube. So every single Wednesday at 3 o'clock, we drop a new episode on YouTube of Michael Jr. Break Time. What it is it's me. I travel around the country and I do stand-up comedy, in case you didn't know. And in the middle of my comedy set sometime, I'll stop and just talk to my audience. And we've been filming this, and it's, you know, it's pretty cool. So we're in Winston-Salem. I'm gonna show you a clip from Winston-Salem. And I'm just talking to this guy in the audience, and he tells me that he's a musical instructor at a school. So I was like, all right, you're a musical instructor, you know, can you sing? Let me hear you sing a song. So this is what happened at the last episode of Michael Jr.'s Break Time. Check it. So you're a musical director. Cool.
Yes, sir.
All right, so let me get a couple bars of like Amazing Grace. Can you do the first part of that? Go ahead.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me.
Wow. That bro could sing, you know what I'm saying? All right. Now, what you give me the version is if Your uncle just got out of jail. You got shot in the back when you was a kid. I'm just saying, let me see the hood version real quick, if you know which version I'm talking about. Just see if that exists. Let me see what you got.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now, right now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see.
Okay. Here's what I want you to catch. The first time I asked him to sing, he knew what he was doing. The second time, he knew why he was doing it. When you know your why, your what becomes more impactful because you're walking towards or in your purpose.
Woo! Yeah. When you know your why, your what has more impact because you're walking in or towards your purpose. Talk to me. I want to hear y'all. How does this resonate as you think about your work? As you think about your why? Why are you here in this space today? Why do you want to commit to equity and justice? Why? Why? Feel free to share in the chat box. Because injustice is crushing. What else?
Can I tell you my why?
Of course.
It may not be the same as the organization's why,
Doesn't it?
but for me, as a Native woman, I've witnessed so much in my whole life of how my people were treated so badly, not only by the police, but by court systems, teachers, medical people, social workers. I mean, there's just a whole list of people that have done not great things to my people. And that was one of the things that prompted me to want to become a lawyer. Was I wanted to be able to change it and to be a part of that change so that people wouldn't have to tolerate being abused or harmed as they were trying to navigate certain systems and navigate interactions like with police and other people in positions of authority. And I think for me, when that happened with George Floyd in 2020, it was shocking. And when I first watched it, I just like blocked it out because it was too much. It was, it was like a shock. And then when I watched it the second time, then it finally sunk in what happened. And then I just cried because I couldn't believe that it was being videotaped and that we all witnessed it. And it was something that I had not seen a death, but I'd seen beatings. So it was like so horrifying. And then at the JBS, I feel like the company a lot of the people in the company were very shocked too, and then also wanted to do something affirmatively to change that type of treatment. And so I'm totally on board with, let's try to do this together, so we don't have people that feel bad about being in an environment. And we want people to come to JBS and feel welcomed and be a part of the process, truly be a part of the process. And so that's why I wanted to be part of the DEI team, because I wanted more and better for our people and all people, you know, that come to JBS. And our focus is just inside JBS, but there's a health equity program or project too that Aldrena and Natalie are on, and they are really doing some awesome stuff too to change the treatment of our people, you know, in a good way.
Thank you for sharing, Shirley. Yeah. You know, I always think about my why, and I've got 2 boys, 2 girls, and I think about my ancestors and the realization that I will be an ancestor someday. And I think about the sacrifices that my ancestors made so that I can occupy this space with you all today, that my voice is one that's able to be heard, that's able to be validated, and I'm able to be seen. And I also know the injustices that I've experienced and that my own children have experienced. And so my why is knowing that I want to plant that seed today, knowing that my ancestors sacrificed in planting the seed during their generations, not knowing what would come of that seed, but knowing that they needed to continue forth and plant it for the next generation. And so my why is to make sure that future generations continue to grow and learn from the mistakes and the hate that are currently happening in my generation. So certainly encourage you all to think about your personal whys and your professional whys. And if you're in an organization that has made the commitment to ask, what is the why? What is the vision? Because only once you have the vision can you really determine how to get there. Right? And sometimes that starts with completing an organizational assessment, thinking about, are relationships a priority with our team members and with those that receive services? Thinking about whether or not conflict is considered a healthy part of the organization's culture, or is it that when people elevate awareness around concerns that they're seen as troublemakers and that conflict is swept under the rug? Is it okay to make mistakes in your organization and it's seen as part of a learning process, and that we're not fixated on perfectionism, but that we are fixated on a growth mindset? Is there consistency, transparency, and equity that's part of the development and the review of policies and procedures, as we talked about earlier? Are we ensuring that we're centering the voices of those most directly impacted and whom have the life experiences from the start to the finish? Are your organizational communications explicit about naming oppression and privilege and always challenging the dominant narrative? And not when it's just in the eyes of needing to be showy, but that this is who we are and it's integrated and ingrained in the culture. And do we ensure that qualitative and quantitative information helps us to measure the impact? Right? And so we need to consistently be evaluating how bias is showing up in our organizational policies, procedures, and practices. This particular tool comes from the Community Wise Resource Center and can be downloaded and utilized for completely free. But it really shows kind of the layers of the organizational onion, if you will. And as you're evaluating equity, is that you need to evaluate equity in every single one of these layers. How are we practicing DEI in our external communications? How are we looking at our programs and our work in community through the lens of diversity, equity, inclusion, accessibility? How do we make sure that our hiring practices are equitable and transparent and that we're practicing pay transparency? Do we accept money from funders that equity is not at the center of their work? Do we review data through an equity lens and ensure that bias is mitigated when we're collecting and looking at the data? Are we explicit in our vision, our mission, our purpose, in really naming inequities and how we are committed to an equitable and just organization? And what about our unwritten rules? Because we all know that oftentimes we have rules and then we really have rules. And so how does this become part and just integrated in so that equity is not seen as an add-on, but equity is very much integrated in? And so you need to take a look at your policies, your practices, your programs through the lens of equity. And we have to ask ourselves the tough questions. Who's considered the experts? Is it the folks that have all the letters behind their names? Or is it those that are living in the situations and circumstances? Right? And when we ask for the expertise of those with lived experience or with from our clients, do we ensure that there's compensation that's provided to those individuals? Do we make sure that all of our team members and our communities have shared governance and that there's the ability to influence decision-making? Right? How are we setting up our team members for success? How are we ensuring transparency in hiring, evaluation, letting someone go? How do we tell stories and engage in ethical storytelling? When we talk about the services that we provide, do we position ourselves as heroes? And we talk about those that we serve as if they're the other, and without us, they'd be nothing? Right? Think about when you're submitting for grants, when you're pleading your case for funders. How do we tell stories about people that we share, that we serve in a way that's ethical and does not promote saviorism? So as you all are continuing to think about your journey on equity, is I would encourage you all, first and foremost, to educate yourself. Understand who you are. What's your identity? What's your worldview? What is it that you believe to be true? Learning is lifelong. It is not one and done. It is about practicing cultural humility and not solely focusing on competence. Question yourself. Question everything that you've learned. And consider, are you willing to unlearn perhaps some of the items that you've learned and have now found that to be untrue? Understand your privilege, your experience with positionality, your experience with power, your experience with oppression. And understand how who you are influences the relationship with those that you're working with. Remember, allyship is not a title. It is a verb. It is an action. It is about intentionally committing yourself to being active in order to ultimately transform yourself and being willing to continue to listen, learn, grow. And remember, there's always a yes and. There's not always one right way. There's not always only one way, but that there are multiple ways and engaging multiple perspectives. So I encourage you all to think about What's the fishbowl that you're swimming in each and every day? And to recognize that for most of us, we are swimming in cultures of white supremacy. And continue to ask yourself and continue to ask your organizations, are you open to the very possibility that some of what we may have been taught, some of what we may be doing, may not actually be the best way? And that we need to be on this continuous journey of exploring alternate ways of thinking and approaches to doing. So my calls to action for all of you is to challenge your biases, evaluate your organizational environments and to challenge the presence of white supremacy, ensure that you're including the voices of individuals and in communities who are impacted from start to finish, review your policies and procedures through an equity lens, and create opportunities for Black, Indigenous, individuals of color, and other marginalized individuals to ensure that not only do they have seats at our tables, but that we're creating relationships where we're able to go in space and in their spaces and to be in community with people. So I'm going to go ahead and just put my contact information up here. And I just want to encourage you all, as we mentioned before, I think as someone said, silence is complicity. And if we remain neutral in situations of injustice, we've chosen the side of the oppressor. If an elephant has his foot on the tail of a mouse and you stand by and say nothing and are neutral, the mouse will not appreciate your neutrality. So I have appreciated our time together in space. Here is my contact information. If I can be of any resource to you all, please do not hesitate to reach out. So thank you all for your time together.